My name is Odalise. I'm 34 years old. I'm a physical therapist specializing in veteran rehabilitation. And last year, I discovered that my own sister had spent 3 years redirecting our disabled father's VA disability compensation into her own personal account, using a power of attorney she never should have had unchecked control over. I want to show you the exact moment a federal benefits auditor confirmed nearly $94,000 had gone missing. But first you need to understand how our father, a decorated Army veteran, ended up with a daughter managing his finances instead of his own bank. Picture this. A Department of Veterans Affairs benefits office in Tampa, May 2026, an auditor sliding a printout across the table showing 3 years of disability payments deposited into an account that wasn't our father's at all. That's where this ends. Let me walk you through how we got there. If you're watching, hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me where you're watching from. I read every comment, and this story means more to me than almost any I've told, because it's about my own father. My father, Gerald, served 2 tours in the Army before a spinal injury during his second deployment left him with permanent mobility limitations and chronic pain, qualifying him for a full disability rating and a monthly VA compensation payment that, by 2022, totaled roughly $3,200 a month, along with additional aid and attendance benefits given his need for regular in-home care assistance. I grew up watching my father manage that injury with a quiet, stubborn dignity that shaped almost everything I eventually became professionally. He rarely complained, even on his hardest days. And when I chose to specialize in veteran rehabilitation during my physical therapy training, it was directly because of watching him navigate a healthcare system that too often treated men like him as case numbers rather than people who'd given something real to earn the care they were owed. I think that background is part of why what eventually happened cut so deep. I'd built an entire career around protecting exactly the kind of benefits my own sister ended up quietly siphoning away from the man who inspired that career in the first place. My sister Renata, 4 years older than me, moved back in with our parents in 2021 after her own divorce, positioning herself as our father's primary caregiver once his mobility declined further following a fall. When our mother passed away in 2022, our father, grieving and increasingly dependent on daily assistance, granted Renata a durable power of attorney over his financial affairs, a decision I supported at the time, since I was living 3 states away and genuinely grateful someone reliable was managing his daily needs. I want to be fair here because Renata was, in many practical ways, a genuinely attentive caregiver during those early years. She managed his medications, drove him to appointments, and by all outward appearances, handled his finances competently. I had no reason in 2022 or 2023 to suspect anything was wrong. The binary choice moment came in late 2024 when I proposed, during a visit, that we set up a joint oversight arrangement for our father's accounts, simply as a precaution given his cognitive decline following a series of small strokes that year. Renata resisted the idea firmly, arguing that involving a second family member would only complicate the straightforward system she'd already built, and that questioning her management felt, to her, like an accusation she didn't deserve after years of daily, hands-on care. I let it go at the time, not wanting to strain a relationship I depended on to keep our father comfortable from a distance. If you've ever trusted a sibling's caregiving completely, only to later wonder what that trust had actually been covering, you understand exactly the unease I'm describing. Drop a comment if that's familiar. Through 2025, our father's cognitive decline progressed further, and I visited more frequently, noticing on one visit in September that his usual complaints about tight monthly budgets seemed inconsistent with what I understood, his VA compensation, to actually total. When I gently asked Renata about the household finances, she grew noticeably defensive, insisting everything was accounted for and that I didn't understand the real costs of his ongoing care. The discovery began almost by accident in February 2026 when I helped my father apply for a supplemental Veterans Home Modification Grant, a process that required a full review of his existing benefits and account history. The VA caseworker assigned to the application, a careful woman named Patrice Ordway, noticed something unusual while pulling his benefits history. His monthly disability compensation, deposited via direct deposit, was routed to an account number that didn't match any account listed under his own name in the VA's records. I remember sitting beside my father during that appointment, watching Patrice's expression shift from routine paperwork focus into something more careful and deliberate, and feeling a very specific, sinking dread settle into my chest before she'd even finished explaining what she'd found. My father, beside me, didn't fully register what was happening at first. His short-term memory had grown unreliable enough by then that I found myself grateful, in a strange way, that the full weight of what we were about to discover wouldn't land on him all at once. Patrice referred the discrepancy to the VA's Office of Inspector General for formal audit, which moved over the following 10 weeks to trace 3 years of deposit history. The findings, delivered in May 2026, confirmed that beginning in early 2023, shortly after our mother's death and Renata's assumption of full financial power of attorney, our father's monthly disability and aid and attendance payments had been redirected to a personal checking account held solely in Renata's name, a change process through a benefits portal login using our father's own credentials. Credentials only Renata had access to as his designated financial representative. Over 3 years, the audit calculated a total of $94,300 in benefits intended for our father's care had instead been deposited directly into Renata's personal account. Funds that bank records showed had gone toward, among other things, a car lease, credit card debt from her divorce, and a series of vacation expenses entirely unrelated to our father's actual needs. The auditor's report itemized each category with a clinical precision that felt, reading it at my kitchen table late one night, almost unbearably cold given what it actually represented. 3 years of a decorated veteran's earned compensation, quietly rerouted to cover someone else's life instead of his own. If you've ever discovered that a sibling's caregiving had been quietly subsidizing their own life at the expense of a parent who trusted them completely, you understand a very specific, complicated kind of anger. Tell me in the comments if you've experienced anything close to it. I confronted Renata after the audit findings came back, not alone, but alongside an elder law attorney named Desmond Okafor I'd retained once the VA's findings made clear this had moved well past a misunderstanding. Renata's composure broke almost immediately once Desmond laid out the specific deposit history alongside her own bank statements, comparing line by line the timing of each VA deposit against the exact dates of her own car lease payments and credit card due dates, a correlation too precise to have been anything but deliberate. It started small, she said, her voice shaking. The divorce left me with nothing. And I told myself borrowing a little from his account, just until I got back on my feet, wasn't really stealing since I was the one doing all the actual caregiving anyway. I kept telling myself I'd pay it back once things stabilized, and then it just didn't stop because nobody was checking, and some part of me had convinced myself I'd earned it through everything I was doing for him every single day. It wasn't a full accounting of what she'd done, but it was the first entirely honest sentence she'd offered since the audit began, and I noted it, quietly, the way I've learned to note everything now. I asked her at one point during that meeting whether she'd ever considered simply telling me she needed help after the divorce, rather than quietly rerouting our father's benefits without ever mentioning her own struggles to either of us. She was quiet for a long moment before answering. I think some part of me was embarrassed, she said. You'd built this whole career around taking care of veterans properly, and I was supposed to be the one actually doing it day to day, and admitting I couldn't even manage my own finances felt like admitting I was failing at the one thing I was supposed to be good at. I didn't have a clean response to that in the moment. I still don't, fully, though I understand it better now than I did that afternoon. Renata's power of attorney was formally revoked through emergency court petition, replaced with a court-appointed conservator overseeing our father's finances going forward, with me added as a co-monitor given my own professional background working with veteran patients. Rather than pursuing full criminal fraud charges, which the VA's Office of Inspector General had grounds to refer, our family, at my father's own explicit wishes once he understood what had happened, negotiated a restitution agreement requiring Renata to repay the diverted funds over a structured timeline, garnished directly from her wages to ensure compliance. Desmond explained to me, during one of our early meetings, that cases like this were far more common than most families ever suspected, adult children who begin as genuinely devoted caregivers, granted broad financial authority out of necessity and trust, who then, under real financial pressure of their own, gradually rationalize small diversions that compound over years precisely because so few families ever build in the kind of independent oversight that might catch it early. He told me that the saddest part of his job wasn't usually the fraud itself, but the fact that so much of it could have been prevented with a single second signature required on outgoing transfers, a safeguard almost no family thinks to ask for until it's already too late. My father cried when Desmond explained the situation to him plainly, not from anger at first, but from what he described quietly as a specific grief at realizing a daughter he'd trusted with everything had needed his own benefits more than she'd been willing to simply ask him for help honestly. I would have given her the money if she'd just asked me, he told me later that same evening, sitting in his recliner with the television off for once, something he almost never did during our visits. That's the part one can't get past. She didn't have to take it. She just had to ask. I spent a long time that same night thinking about how much of my father's entire life had been built around exactly that kind of quiet generosity. The same man who'd given 2 tours of his own body to a country that didn't always give much back in return, telling me, at 81 years old, that his daughter's theft hurt less than her silence had. I think in some way that sentence captures something true about our entire family, not just Renata's specific choices. A house full of people who loved each other deeply and still, somehow, struggled to simply ask for help honestly when it actually mattered most. Renata and I speak occasionally now, careful, brief conversations mostly focused on logistics around our father's ongoing care, which I now oversee jointly with the court-appointed conservator rather than trusting to any single family member alone. I think most days about how thin the line apparently was for her between genuine caregiving and genuine theft, and how neither of us fully understood, until the VA's own audit made it undeniable that both things had been happening simultaneously, under the same roof, for 3 entire years. I think if you've made it this far, the thing worth remembering tonight is this. Real caregiving and real theft can exist in the very same relationship, carried out by the very same hands, and recognizing that doesn't require you to stop loving the person capable of both. It just requires you to build oversight into love, especially when the person you love the most is also the one with the least accountability left checking on them. And benefits meant to honor someone's service and sacrifice deserve exactly the same rigorous protection as any other asset, examined carefully enough by people willing to actually check the account number attached to every single deposit. If this story meant something to you, subscribe, drop a like, and tell me where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs it. I'll see you in the next one.